Welcome. Super excited to have everyone joining us here today. I'm Andrea Allen. I'm one of the co-founders of Onyx Coffee Lab, and we are here to talk through some really fun drinks, the Complete Negroni and the Extra Dirty Cardamom Chai. But before we fully jump in, I just want to give a shout out to Breville and Crate and Barrel for making this series possible. So it's really super cool when we can do this kind of content that's just out there for anyone to like watch and participate in. And it's accessible, and we're just like super excited to offer the series. The series is going to continue throughout the fall as well. So I'm super excited. We've got some really fun drinks that we're bringing your way. I'm also going to this fall be like revisiting some just like fun basics about espresso, milk. We're going to have a class where we talk through how to use your Breville espresso machine to make ice drinks, which is super cool. So stay tuned for all of that. But for today's class, I'm just really, really excited because I think both of these drinks explore the drink construction concept of just creating balances of flavor. So both of these drinks play with bitterness, sweetness, with acidity. And it really is fun to kind of play around with these sorts of recipes and work to create balance. So when I think about balance, I just think about like being a harmonious mixture of all of those elements. So salt, sweet, acid, bitter, and someone that I really admire out there in the coffee world named Candace. She's a Q grader and just a really great coffee professional. She was teaching this class one time and just discussed the way that balance plays as like a bunch of kids playing on the playground. And so she was like, you don't want any of those flavors to become a bully, because when any of those flavors like get really aggressive in the drink, it becomes like not any fun anymore. And I loved the way she put that because it's just so true to be to think about the way that all of the flavors like play and mix together to make harmonious drinks. So shout out to Candace. Thank you so much for always inspiring me and lots of other folks. Great. So we're going to start with the Extra Dirty Cardamom Chai today. It's called Extra Dirty because it has 2 shots of espresso in it. So I think like approaching like a coffee shop and just all of like the lingo that goes in, it can often feel like there's this kind of like inside like, like secret menu that you could order off of if you only knew like how baristas thought about drinks or talked about drinks. So the dirty chai is kind of a drink that kind of flies under the radar sometimes. And in fact, at Onyx, it's not on our like official menu, but of course we like make it, we love it, we know how to make it. And so we're going to be making through that today. I also forgot to mention that if you have any questions at all about ingredients, drink builds, theories, why is the weather so hot, things like that, you want to throw that into the chat. I'll answer those questions like as we go along, and would love to hear what you have to think. But back to the chai. So basically what chai is, or like chai concentrate, is a concentrated black tea that has been spiced. So most of them have like ginger, cardamom, cinnamon, sweetness of some kind. And really like it's meant to be this like really heavily sweet, concentrated, really spiced beverage that you mix with milk. So it's built to be a concentrate for the most part. And so you can also, of course, find like more like loose leaf chais or, things like that in the grocery store that are more like a loose leaf tea that's just meant to be brewed with water. But the chai concentrate is really delicious. It's really flavorful. It often reminds people of like the holiday season, I think, because it plays with those spices that often remind us of like baked goods or, those kind of like smells and aromas that we experience during the holidays. And so traditionally, like a chai drink or a chai latte, which would just be like chai and milk steamed together, is not served with espresso. So basically, like what happens with the thought process of adding espresso in is that you're, of course, like adding caffeine. You're adding the bitterness of espresso and also the sweetness and acidity that espresso tends to offer. So in that way, the Extra Dirty Cardamom Chai becomes like a really spicy, coffee forward, sweet, beautiful drink. I'm going to add a little bit of extra cardamom too, because I think it's really fun to kind of like push on the spice side. I really like spices in my chai, and so that's kind of the thought process behind that as well. So typically, a typical like standard chai recipe is going to be 50% chai, 50% milk for like your either steamable milk base, or if you're doing it iced, it would still be 50 of those items, and then you add the coffee to it. I would be remiss to not mention that it's really hot here in Arkansas where I'm at, and it's like hot all over the country. So if you're hearing chai and you're thinking like, wow, that sounds amazing, but it's just so hot, you can actually take this recipe that we have here and just like put it in a shaker, shake it with ice, strain it over ice, or if you don't have a shaker, you can just stir it over ice and it'll be great and it won't be so hot. But I would like to mention, if you're going to do that with the cardamom added, you'll need to like get the cardamom to like mix up in the espresso first. Okay. But let's talk about espresso first, of course. So today I'm brewing the tropical weather espresso from Onyx, or coffee from Onyx on espresso. And so I want to just talk through a couple of like quick basics about making espresso for a drink like this, or a drink like the Complete Negroni. And the full truth is that I'm going to use the same coffee with the same recipe, with the same flavor profile in the espresso for both drinks. So I don't need to like change what I'm doing to like fit the drinks, these particular drinks. This coffee has a lot of like berry sweetness. It has like some brown sugar style sweetness to it, and also some stone fruit kind of flavors going on in it. And so for me, I felt like this both fit with the chai and with the Complete Negroni, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. I think really the main way that you would like vary your flavor components that the espresso is bringing to the drink would just be simply to switch beans. So you switch to a different bean. You can switch to something like our Monarch espresso is going to be like a little bit more on the traditional side, a little more like chocolatey tasting, kind of some of those citrus and orange flavor notes going on. But for this time, we're just using the tropical weather. Okay, so I'm going to make espresso in the way that I always do. I get so many questions about how to make great espresso at home, and just like, how do I use this machine that I have? What grind setting do I have it on? And so really, like, there's really two main things that I want you to think about when you're making espresso. So the first thing is just that you want to prepare it the same way every time, with the way that you're moving throughout your preparation method. Just meaning that what you want is for the grind size of the coffee to be the only thing that is affecting the way that your coffee extracts. Extract is just a fancy word for brew. So the first one is just to make sure your method is correct and consistent. And the second one is to make sure your grind size is on a proper setting. So grind size, I think, is actually one of the most complicated aspects of making espresso, and actually just making coffee in general. So here's the way it works. The finer your coffee is ground, the harder the water has to work to come down through the coffee and to extract or brew it. The longer it takes for it to come out, the more of the beautiful soluble materials in the coffee extract, and the more concentrated, the more like bitter, the more sour, not sour, but just like the more bitter it can be. And that's a finer grind size. On the other side, a coarser grind size has more airways inside of the coffee bed for the water to come through, meaning that the water can come through faster, creating less extraction or brewing, which yields a more sour flavor. So all of that to say, you want your grind size set on the right setting so that you get like a really even extraction. And we're looking to extract like really around 20-ish% of the soluble material into the espresso. And if you heard that and you're just like, I mean, how in the world would I ever know that? Don't worry about it, because like I literally never measure those things. That's just like an example of something that we're like hoping to achieve. And the way that you can know that you've achieved that is how it tastes. So like I was mentioning earlier, you want it to be balanced. So you don't want to have any of that sour, sweet, acidic, or bitter components overriding one of the others. So you don't want any of those to be bullies in the cup. So the thought process is that as you drink your espresso, every time you brew it, you're going to want to drink it and kind of like think through, like, is it harmonious? Do the flavors work well together? Is it palatable? I know that's kind of a funny thing, but espresso is like a real specific kind of beverage to drink. And so just like thinking about whether you actually can drink in and at least moderately enjoy it, I think is a good thing. So then the way that we're going to kind of achieve this extraction is by executing my method consistently and also following the recipe that I have kind of set out for myself every time. So on this machine I have, there's a 54 millimeter espresso basket, and that's just measuring like how big it is right here. But basically that means I can comfortably fit around 15 grams of espresso into this basket. So if you've followed espresso like recipes, or you know, the roaster you buy from, or us, like we have recipes listed on the website, and it says something like 20 grams in, 42 out at 25 seconds. This particular basket, you would be very hard pressed to get 20 grams into this, because it's just not big enough. It's not made for that. So for this one, I'm going to put 15 grams of coffee in. And what I'm going to do is measure the output in ounces. I want for about 3/4 of an ounce to come out on either side. I'm making a double shot, and I want that to happen in around 24 seconds. Okay, enough talking. Let's start making. So my first step in my process is to get my portafilter and clean it out. So what I'm doing here is getting out any coffee, any water, but also any oils that might be existing in the bottom of my portafilter. Because again, going back to that extraction thought process of the water coming down through the coffee, I don't want anything in this portafilter that's going to interfere with the fresh coffee that I've just put in it. Okay, so now I'm going to grind. So for this particular machine, this is the Barista Pro, and I have it set on 11 seconds of a grind time, and I have it set on grind setting 8. Now, I say that I'm not usually a big fan of telling you exactly what it's set on, because depending on what coffee you're on, it's going to you could think, oh my gosh, I have my grind size on 12. Or maybe your machine has grind sizes 1 through 40, and you're like, oh my gosh, she's on 8. All the machines are different. So I don't necessarily approach a machine and pick a setting and then make espresso. I approach a machine and make espresso and then adjust the settings to meet what I'm wanting to see. So for this particular coffee, I'm wanting to see 15 grams into this portafilter. I'm wanting to see about 3/4 ounce out on either side in 24 seconds. Okay, so now that I've got all my coffee in here, I'm going to do what's called distributing. And so basically that's just I'm smoothing the coffee around. And what I want to do is create a really even surface for me to tamp down. Because what I want to do as well is encourage the water that's going through the portafilter to go through consistently every time. So anything that introduces a level of inconsistency in my process is going to add the risk of inconsistency in my espresso itself. And this is why it's so important to have a consistent method every time. Okay, so I haven't tamped yet, but I've just set my tamper down. And I'm kind of just evaluating how even it is. Looks pretty good to me, which is awesome. So then I'm going to tamp with 40 pounds of pressure. And you can see I've got this really great L shape going on with my arm. And that's because I want to preserve my joints in my body by like having my weight go over onto this. So you want around 40 pounds of pressure, which is really not much at all. And just thinking about, you know, like an average human weighing 200 pounds or 175 or something like that. Like if you just even lean on something, that's easily 40 pounds. So you don't need to like force it. You don't need to like try super hard. It's just a really simple like tamp. Okay. So now I'm ready to extract. So I'm going to put this in. I'm going to turn it on as soon as it goes in, and I'm going to let it flow. I'm also going to like move these things a little bit. So basically what I'm looking for here is I'm looking for like a dark stream to start coming out slowly, and it's going to get faster over time. And so you can see it looks like a strand of wet spaghetti coming out, which is great. And then you can see it's lightening a little bit over time, the color. So what's happening here is that the very first part of that extraction is going to be all of the like sour, acidic, and becoming into sweet solubles. So those very first drops are super important. They're very concentrated, and they contain all the fun flavor elements of each coffee. And then as you go through extraction, then sweetness extracts next, and then bitterness at the end. So if you hear nothing from me at all today about espresso, except for this, is sour, sweet, and bitter. And if you taste your espresso and it's more on the sour side, it means you need to get over to the bitter side and have a little bit more extraction, which means you would need to make your grind finer. If you're a little bit on the bitter side and you drink, you're like, oh my gosh, it's so bitter. It's like you might need to move a little bit back over to the like lighter extracted, lower extracted side by having a faster brew or faster extraction, which means you need a larger grind size. So it's all about tasting those flavors across the board and them being harmonious, balanced, and palatable. Okay, so I've got my espresso ready. And how I'm going to make this is basically I'm going to steam the chai and the milk together, and then I'm going to pour it over the espresso. So the brands of things that I'm using today, I'm using Rishi Chai concentrate, and I'm using Pacific Series oat milk. And then I'm going to just put a tiny pinch of ground cardamom in here, in the milk to steam together. So you just want to be careful when you're adding spices just in general to drinks, because this chai already has some spices in it. And so we just like, I don't want it to get like too over the top, but I do want to bump up the spice level a little bit. Okay, so now I'm ready to steam. So basically what I'm looking for here is I'm like wanting my chai to get to 140 degrees. And I'm also wanting to create some foam. So basically what my goal is here is to position the steam wand in the steam pitcher in an angle that will make a rapid swirling motion inside the steam pitcher. So I've done this by basically putting my steam wand kind of like right in the middle of the pitcher, but then going a quarter of the way over to the side. I've also got the steam pitcher slanted a little bit, and like I don't necessarily need it to be slanted to steam well, but because of the size of this pitcher and the where the grate is, I do need to have it to the side a little bit. So you can hear I've got some really great little small hiss noises going on. And then as it gets closer to temperature, I'm going to stop letting the steam wand aerate. Perfect. I will say that sometimes these smaller home machines can be challenging to steam on if you're used to like a commercial machine. But one of the things I think Breville does a really great job of is creating steam wands that work really, really well on the home level. So for this particular machine, like it takes me a little bit longer to steam, and I have to like be really controlled with it because I want to like have just exactly the right aeration into this chai so that I can make microfoam. But really, it's pretty amazing what can be done at home with these machines. Really impressive. Okay, so now I've got my espresso shots in here, and I'm basically just going to pour the chai over the top. I'm just using kind of a nice old-fashioned glass because I know everyone hears me talk about this, but one of the things about coffee that can be challenging is that coffee is almost always brown. And while the color, of course, never affects the taste, like we always eat with our eyes. And so like this is exactly what every latte you can dream of looks like. And for a lot of people, you see that and you're like, oh my gosh, that looks so good, because you love lattes and you love espresso and milk. And I do as well. But I'm always looking for ways to do two things. First of all, to present drinks in a way that makes us like appreciate the drink itself and appreciate the hospitality and the care and intentionality that went into making it. And number two, I'm always looking for ways to help you at home use those beautiful cocktail glasses that you don't use very much. So it's like, think about it like this. This is an old-fashioned glass. I could put all kinds of cocktails in it. You can also put all kinds of coffees in it too. So if you're like always using your coffee mugs and you love them, but you're having folks over and you want to impress, you want to dress your drinks to impress, get those cocktail glasses out and give them a try. And so then the other thing I decided to do with this drink is to bring a little graham cracker along and just garnish the top. So doing something like this is, first of all, fun. It's tasty. I'm a big dunker, so I love dunking pastries or cookies or whatever into coffee drinks. I think it's super fun. But it also like helps garnish the top of the drink, makes the drink seem interesting, as well as make the drink actually interesting. So I love to do this sort of thing. And if you see something like this, and if you saw the picture on the recipe card, this drink like looks really nice. It looks really put together, and really this drink is super simple, and is just hopefully using a cocktail glass that you already have at home with a little like cookie of some kind on the top, and it's really super fun. Yeah. So cheers. I'm gonna try it. I'm excited. I think it's like straight Christmas morning. I love it. It's really good. Yay. There it is. Looks so nice. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions, love to hear them. But we're going to move on to our next drink. If you have any questions about that drink as well, you can just put them in the chat and I'll answer them at any time. Okay, so the next drink is what I'm calling the Complete Negroni. And the Negroni is such an incredibly interesting space because I feel like there's lots and lots of different like styles of making Negroni, as well as like I saw so many different what claimed to be styles of Negroni, but actually felt like exactly the same as the other things I was reading. So I know that there's like lots of places that do like Negroni week, people that like are rabid about Negroni. And so in that way, I'm going to like just try to be as thoughtful as possible about this like recipe that I put together. But basically across the board, Negronis are essentially like equal parts gin, Campari, and vermouth. So gin is the spirit here. And what also is really fascinating is that a lot of these drinks, there's other like versions of cocktail that trade out the spirit that makes it a slightly different cocktail, which is super cool. But really what these three components are playing with is, again, that sour, acidic, sweet, and then bitter component that creates balance. So just looking through like kind of a standard Negroni recipe where you have like equal parts gin, Campari, and vermouth. You've got the gin playing on with the like acidity side in a way. So you've got like this particular gin is like a botanical spirit. You've got the Campari playing with bitterness. So Campari is like an aperitif for a bitter that is like made with alcohol and then seed plants. Very basic explanation. And then the vermouth is like a fortified wine that's going to like bring sweetness, florality, and just like also a little bit of botanical notes to the drink as well. So in that way, you're hitting across the spectrum of that balance point of view. So when thinking about adding coffee to this drink, I felt kind of nervous because I just really have this kind of funny experience with espresso cocktails. So for the most part, what happens with any espresso cocktail is that you end up needing a really sweet, fat-driven component to bridge the bitterness with the spirit. And that almost always plays out as chocolate. So although I have no shade on the espresso martini, I also throw shade on the espresso martini because it is like basically the only coffee cocktail that I see for the most part in most restaurants. So, and I also know it's like super popular. So, but in that way, it is always dependent on that chocolate to bridge the gap between the bitterness that is inherent in espresso and the spirit, because they often just like really are at odds with being together. So what I have kind of like felt as I've been adding coffee into this Negroni is that in this venue, I think the vermouth adds lots of sweetness that helps tie it together. But really, the coffee itself actually mimics the flavors of the ingredients that are going into the Negroni. Just meaning that the same like sour, sweet, and bitter, and when I say sour, I'm also meaning acidic, components of the different ingredients in the Campari are actually very, very similar to the flavors of this espresso. So I actually found that just adding another equal part, instead of having 3 equal parts, just adding that 4th equal part of coffee was super harmonious and balanced and really tasty in this drink. The other thing that I think is really super interesting is taking this kind of thought process on this drink and combining it with this drink that is really popular right now called the Sproje. So the Sproje is basically like exactly what it sounds like. It's orange juice with espresso in the top. And when I think about that too, I feel like just hearing about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, that sounds like it would be not good. But again, it's like the sweetness and the acidity in the orange juice itself and the way that matches with the bitterness that helps balance the orange juice and then the acidity and the sweetness and the espresso, it actually works together really, really well. So I think that's just something to keep in mind is that anytime you're trying to make an espresso cocktail, you're just going to have that underlying sweetness that ties everything together. But there are so many options out there when you start thinking about sweeteners. And in this particular recipe, it's going to be the vermouth. I did also add in an optional 3 ounces of orange juice, because if you want to make it like a slightly bigger drink and have it be like a little less intense in its like spirit driven nature, you just put the orange juice in the drink as well. And then it's like a really interesting combination of a Sproje and a Negroni. Woo! What an explanation. Okay, so let's just move ahead and we're going to make espresso again. So basically, I'm just literally going to do exactly the same thing I did before, because remember, I want to make sure that my process is the same every time, because I want to have the only thing changing the coffee is the grind size. So I'm going to start, wipe it out really well, grind it. Okay, so I've got it all ground. Okay, So you can see that I've got quite a bit of coffee on the top, and I kind of was talking a lot earlier, so I didn't show you all this. But basically, this is pretty normal because like 15 grams of coffee in this basket are like, is normal. And then as I'm like distributing it and leveling it out, it'll go down into the portafilter. And you might be thinking something like, she's not using a scale. I don't have a scale. How do I know it's 15 grams? I wouldn't worry too much about it. You saw about how much was there. And then like when I distribute it out, it's super even across the portafilter. And that's really all you need to know if you don't have a scale or have other things like that. Okay, so I'm going to tamp. Just going to put it nice and even. Get my L shape. Just lean on it. Perfecto. One of the things I like about making both of these drinks together in this glass is that they literally could not be more different. Their flavor, just like the way that we're making them, everything about it is completely different. And yet the cornerstone, I feel like, of both of these recipes is the espresso that we're making. Also, I feel really excited. Both of those shots pulled right at 24. Feel really good about that. Okay, so here's the other thing that happens when you're trying to put espresso into a cocktail or even like certain kinds of ice drinks is that the coffee is often like pulled, the espresso is pulled, and then it's just like kind of thrown immediately into the drink. And that's a mistake because I know I've been talking about bitterness as a positive quality, because it is. In fact, the Campari functions as a bitter. But you can really get overly bitter with espresso really quickly, especially when you're combining it with other bitters and with spirits. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to pour it into this pitcher. And this is going to do two things. This is going to cool the espresso down. It's also going to allow me to strain out the crema. So the crema is like the lighter colored kind of like frothy component that's on top of the coffee after you pull it. And that actually is where almost all of the bitterness in espresso lives. So what I'm doing here is like cooling it, but then I'm actually going to strain it out from here. And that's going to remove most of the crema from the top. And it's going to remove some of the bitterness so that what I'm utilizing is those really incredible berry flavors, the kind of like the brown sugar sweetness going on in the coffee and the stone fruit going on in this coffee. And I want to like pull it out because what I want is for the Campari to be the bitter component, not the crema. And I'm just doing this to cool it because if you take hot espresso and you just like dump it over ice, it's like, it just like almost does what we call like shocks the espresso, but it kind of creates this like really interesting, I don't even know how to describe it, just kind of like off flavor. And so I like to just cool it before I put it on ice in this way, just so that like it's really nice and ready to go to mix with the drink. So I'm going to let that cool, and I'm going to go ahead and add all of the components of the drink into my what's this thing called? Mixing glass. Cool. So basically, this is just like equal parts of all of the ingredients that I have here. So I just have it listed as 2 ounces because I wanted to fill up this glass, and that feels like a really good balanced recipe. But you could do like however many ounces of things that you want. And just remember that as you change the ounces and if you change the portions, you are introducing that element of like changing the like way that those ingredients play together to create balance in the drink. Okay, so I'm going to start with the gin. I'm going to do 2 ounces of gin. So I made this drink earlier this week, and then I literally sipped on it for a hot moment at work, and I literally like took it home in my car. And after I got into the car, because I thought it was so good, I wanted my husband John to taste it. And I was like, oh, I'll just put it in the car like it's a to-go thing. I got in the car and then I started driving and I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, this is against the law basically in every like state. And I was like, it's fine. I literally live like a half a mile from where I'm at right now. I was like, I'll just run home. And then nothing happened, but I pulled out and there was a cop right there. And I was like, literally, if I get pulled over, I'm just gonna be like, listen, like, you can take me straight to jail. I'm breaking the law. And so I was like trying to, you know, like have my hands exactly on the wheel. And keep in mind, I hadn't been like drinking and then driving. I was just driving with a drink that I wasn't planning to drink, but it was in the car. I was like, what's happening? Anyways, so I drove right on past that police officer. I was like, cool, everything's fine. And then I turned onto my street and there was a police officer there too. And I was like, you know what? If it happens, it happens. And it didn't. I'm here for the class. This is great. But I was like really stressing about it. And I'm glad I just told that story on this platform that's going to live forever. So, okay. Back to the drink. So I just put equal ounces of everything in it. One of the things I think that is super fun about Negroni is that really deep ruby red color that it has. And so, unfortunately, espresso like just is brown, and it basically just makes it a little bit more brown. And so when I pour the espresso into this drink, I'm actually going to pour the liquid into the drink first, and then I'm going to pour the espresso on top just for fun. And then I'm going to garnish it with an orange. So I've actually got two different kinds of orange here. I've got a dried orange slice. It's a blood orange slice. And I think it's really beautiful. But I also like think it's easier to work with in terms of like actual garnish. So basically, like what I would do here is just like cut a little slice in this orange, and then I'm going to garnish it on the side. But I actually want to have some like orange oil or essence from the, what is this called? The peel. Thank you. My team's here and they're like, what's happening? I'm going to have a little bit from this peel as well. So I'm going to go ahead and like just make a little slice from this. And then when I'm ready, I'm just going to squeeze it over the top. So what that's going to do is add just like a tiny little drop of oil onto the top of the drink that is actually going to function more like an aromatic component than a flavor component. So basically what that means is just that like when you squeeze the oil onto the top and you start drinking it, you smell it, and your olfactory part of your nose actually makes up a really large part of what you're tasting. So you're not actually going to be tasting anything orange unless you put the orange juice in there. You're just going to be smelling the oil and perceiving it with your palate, which is really super cool. Okay. So basically I'm just like stirring that over ice. I've done this drink several ways, stirred and shaken. I decided to stir it and then just pour it over today because I'm trying to preserve a little bit of this color. And then pouring the espresso on top. That is so beautiful. Okay. So there's the base of the drink. And this is basically just like a standard Negroni. And so now I'm going to go ahead and pour the espresso on top. And it's pretty cool. I mean, it's about probably at like around 100 degrees, which is totally fine for this drink. But again, I'm going to be straining out the crema. Becoming more and more of a fan of this kind of like preparation of a drink that then you pour espresso or you pour something else in the top. It really like is fun to watch something pour in the way that it like changes the way the drink looks, changes the color. And you can often like, because the espresso is almost always a completely different like density than the liquid it's going into, it just kind of like behaves like almost like a cloud in a way. Like it swirls and it kind of pools, and it's just really super beautiful. Okay, so now I've got the drink. I'm going to just give it a little express here. This is literally one of the most fascinating parts of like drink making and bartending, is like this method of taking a peel and just like squeezing it and letting some of the like oils come out. It's really crazy. And it's like you think of like an orange peel as like a dry thing, but like, I don't know if you can see, my fingertips are just literally wet from all of the oil coming out. It's such a really cool way to use like to use the fruit as a whole. If you were using an orange, you can like use the use the like peel, you can like grate it, you can do all kinds of things with it. It's really, really cool. Okay, so I'm gonna just go ahead and like give it a stir, because I want to just like finish mixing the drink so that when I taste it, it's all mixed up together. I'm gonna take my garnish. Just gonna slide it over the side. It's really great. So in this iteration, this like orange slice that I have on the top is actually not doing a ton for the like aroma or the flavor or the drink as a whole. It's really just like being a representative of that orange that I just squeezed over the top. Also the citric acidity that's naturally present in the coffee. And it's also just like gives a nice geometric shape on top of the drink. So I think it just looks great. And it's also like the glass is, of course, like a sphere, and this is a circle, and just makes like a really nice presentation. That thing is so good. Very nice. Cool. All right. That brings us to the end of the drink making for the day. If anyone has any questions, I would totally love to answer them. Just put them in the chat. And I just want to like put in a plug for a couple of like things I played around with this Negroni that I thought were super interesting. So I did some experimenting with using a brewed coffee instead of espresso. And I had like a couple of versions of that I thought were pretty good. But because of the nature of like cocktails being typically like pretty concentrated, pretty like flavor and spirit forward, I felt like a brewed coffee just kind of like brought the overall level of like pop of like sweetness and acidity down. But I did have some success with like brewing a pour over that I kind of like brewed short, meaning that like I use like 400 grams of coffee, and instead of using 24 grams of coffee. That'd be crazy if I made something with a pour over with 400 grams of coffee. But I use 24 grams of coffee, and then I would normally use 400 grams of water for that ratio. But basically I put like 250 grams of water in it. And my thought process there was just to like make a really concentrated kind of like pour over brewed coffee that could like function like it is a concentrate in a drink like this. And that was really interesting. When I did that, I used a Kenya coffee. Kenya coffees tend to have tons of like phosphoric acid. So they have a lot of that kind of like mouth-watering quality. And they usually tend to also have like really high citric acidity. So like orange, grapefruit, apricot kinds of flavors in them. And it was super interesting in this flavor profile. But I didn't think it was as good as this iteration is. And so that's kind of like why I ended up with using this espresso. Fun. Awesome. Thanks so much for joining me today. This has been really fun, and I'm looking forward to the new season that's going to be coming out in August. So we'll be doing a class every month, August through December, and they're going to be on the second Wednesday of each month as we go forward. So the date and the time is changing a little bit. But you can always watch these series on YouTube live afterwards. So yeah, thanks so much for joining me today, and hopefully I'll see you again next time. Thank you.